Welcome back to Carneades.org. Today we're going to be continuing with looking at the teleological argument for the existence of God. In this video, we're going to be looking at objections to some of the teleological arguments. Here we'll be looking at objections to the arguments from analogy, what seem to me to be some of the weakest arguments for God in this teleological family. We've already offered some objections from David Hume, if you want to check that video out. Here, I'm going to offer some of my own objections to really put this argument to rest. So the argument went as follows. If you want to watch the original video on some of the reasons you might want to believe these premises, you should check that out earlier in the series. For now, I'm going to offer a few objections to each of these premises and talk about some of the reasons you might not think the argument form is valid or even something you want to believe in or think is justified. So, first premise seems to hinge on us finding some relevant way R. In fact, this whole argument seems to hinge on that relevant way R. What is the way that some object in nature M resembles some man-made artifact M? In this, I'm going to look at two common uses or common things that we plug in for R. In other objection videos that come to other versions of the argument, I'm going to throw in some different ways that people explain this R or different adjectives that they plug in for R. Here we're going to be talking about complexity and purpose. So, it seems that complexity is going to be problematic because a number that has, let's say, 10 to the 10,000 factorial randomly chosen digits seems very complex. But it seems that with enough digits, one could be more complex than, in fact, the whole universe. If you can just keep adding on a lot of digits, one probably would get pretty complex. Yet, such a number is not designed. It's complex, but it inherently isn't designed because all the digits are randomly chosen. Therefore, we have a bit of a problem. And as to purpose, imagine that a large stone is put into a machine that randomly cuts and breaks off parts and pieces of it. A human is then given the stone, and that human finds a use for it. Perhaps as part of a machine, perhaps as a piece of art. It has a purpose because it was given a purpose, but it was created randomly. It didn't need to be designed, it was simply given a purpose. Premise 2, as Hume notes, is not going to be problematic in itself. The problem that comes from premise 2 is what we think we can deduce from it. Because it seems that many things can be given purpose or complexity without being designed. So while a specific artifact M may have R because it was created by deliberate human design, it doesn't seem that it follows that any artifact or any natural object would have R because it's created by deliberate design. A couple more examples to push this home. Who is to say that an intricate random arrangement of pine needles across an entire forest floor is less complex than a calculator? In fact, it often might seem more complex, and yet it's clearly not created by deliberate human design, or arguably any deliberate design. And what makes a chair have more purpose than a log that's simply given purpose by someone sitting on it? The log isn't designed to be somewhere to sit, or it would seem that it's not. Perhaps someone wants to argue that, but that seems to be quite a far-fetched conclusion. And yet, it is given purpose. It has a purpose. It's given that purpose by the person that sits on it, just as the chair is given purpose by the person that goes and sits on it. Now, premise 3, as Hume notes, is a big problem. I'm going to offer some more objections here. It seems that similar effects only have similar causes if the effects are similar enough. A loud rumble from far away might be caused by thunder or an earthquake. Different causes to the same effect. The problem here seems to be that the effect we have is too general. It's not specific enough. Perhaps if there was a specific resonance frequency of that rumble, we might be able to specify what we're talking about. But even then, I'm not sure we could get the exact same cause happening at that frequency every single time. And it also seems to depend on how far you go back in the causal chain. It seems that some similar effects may have similar causes if you go back 1 or 2 steps, but not if you go back 3 or 4 steps. And maybe if you go back 5 or 6 steps, they will again. So it really depends on how far you go back in that chain. For example, seeing an explosion may have the same direct cause as seeing another explosion, such as there was actually an explosion. Parts of something flew away from each other really, really fast. But maybe they have different indirect causes, such as a gas line blew up or a man set a bomb by a building. They might be different chemical reactions, but create what seems to be the same effect. So we could have different causes farther down along the line, even if the more proximate or direct causes are the same. So there seems to be a lot of difference and a lot of very specific things to parse here that the argument kind of glosses over. And the key is how similar two effects need to be to necessitate similar causes. Complexity, for example, can be created by both randomness and design. So it doesn't seem that complexity as an effect necessitates design as a cause. Being suited to a specific purpose, similarly, as we've noted above, can be due to random causes and a mind later attributing a purpose to it, or a mind seeing a purpose and designing an object to suit it. The point is that because we can have different causes coming to the same effect in quite common situations. These aren't really strange situations we're looking at. They seem to happen all the time. We seem to have a lot of counterexamples to premise 3. For example, some sculptors might take a medium and change it so that it suits a specific purpose. They might go and design that medium. They might see a giant block of marble and sculpt something out of it. Others, however, might arrange randomly created objects and give them a purpose that they lacked to begin with. For example, the famous signing of a urinal and making it art. Or we can look at the idea of you could carve a motorcycle out of wood, or you could find driftwood that looks like parts of a motorcycle or a whole motorcycle and assemble it. They have the same effect, and yet different causes in respect to purpose. In one way, a designer gives a purpose to something that didn't have that effect to begin with. And in the other case, someone simply says that something that already has that effect has that purpose. Finally, let's talk about the conclusion and how we get here. Similar effects do not explain in what way the causes must be similar. 2 different light bulbs may have similar effects. In fact, light is created. And causes that are similar in some ways, electricity is running through them, but different in other ways. In one, the light might be caused by electricity running through a gas. In the other, the light is caused by the heating of a filament. The point is that just because we have similar effects, and even if that does imply similar causes, it doesn't say, once again, how specific we need to get with those causes. It doesn't say what of those causes needs to be similar. So therefore, just because the causes are similar, that doesn't mean that they both have anything to do with human-like intelligence. Just because 2 things are caused in the same way doesn't mean that that way has something to do with human-like intelligence. It might have something to do with some other part of the cause of that. Human-like intelligence might be the thing that's in fact different. And the point that I would come back to over and over again on this argument is that even at its best, it is only an argument from analogy. And it's simply based on analogy. It is not deductively valid. as a form of argument, to me, it's not convincing. And it definitely wasn't convincing to Hume. Generally, in my experience, this argument isn't offered too much anymore for a number of reasons. One, it's been debunked and shown that there's a lot of good objections to it over and over again. And two, because there's better arguments for design out there. I would classify this as one of the weakest, if not the weakest, teleological argument, and I would say that with all of these objections, we've really put it to bed. So, that was the argument from analogy. Next up, we're going to take a look at a stronger argument, the watch argument, then abductive arguments, and finally, what seems to me to be the strongest of the teleological arguments, the cosmic fine-tuning argument. Watch this video and more here at Carneades.org, and stay skeptical, everybody.